The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Forward Operating Base Phoenix as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez walked into the armory tent. At 26, she had already completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, but today felt different. Intelligence reports indicated a massive Taliban offensive was planned for their remote outpost, which housed over 100 soldiers from various units. Maria approached the weapons sergeant, a gruff man named Thompson who had been issuing equipment for 15 years. She needed something with serious firepower for the upcoming mission. The base's perimeter was vast, and early reconnaissance suggested they would face overwhelming numbers. "I need to requisition an M249 saw," Maria stated firmly, referring to the squad automatic weapon known for its devastating suppressive fire capability. Thompson looked up from his clipboard and laughed. "The saw? That thing weighs over 20 pounds loaded. You sure you can even carry it, Rodriguez?" His tone carried the familiar skepticism Maria had encountered throughout her military career. "I can handle it," she replied, maintaining her professional composure despite the condescending response. "Look, why don't you take a nice M4 carbine instead? Much more suitable for someone your size," Thompson suggested, gesturing toward the lighter weapons rack. "The saw is for the big boys who can actually manage the recoil." Other soldiers in the armory began to take notice of the conversation. A few chuckled when Thompson made his comment about the weapon being too heavy for Maria. She had proven herself countless times in combat situations, but the old attitudes about women in combat roles persisted among some personnel. Maria's jaw tightened, but she remained calm. "Sergeant Thompson, I've qualified expert on the M249. I know exactly what I'm requesting and why I need it. Expert qualification on a range is different from carrying that beast through real combat, Rodriguez. Trust me, stick with what you know," Thompson continued, his voice growing louder as more soldiers gathered around. The whispers and snickers from the growing crowd of onlookers stung. But Maria had faced this kind of doubt before. She knew that. Tomorrow's mission would be unlike anything they had encountered. The intelligence briefing painted a grim picture of coordinated attacks from multiple directions, and she would be positioned at a crucial choke point. "Fine," Maria said finally. "Give me the M4, but when this goes sideways tomorrow, remember this conversation." As she walked away with the lighter weapon, Maria could hear Thompson telling his buddies, "Some people need to learn their limitations the hard way." The laughter that followed echoed in her ears as she left the armory. That evening, Maria sat in her quarters cleaning her assigned M4 while studying the tactical maps spread across her small desk. The base's defensive positions formed a rough circle with several vulnerable gaps that the enemy could exploit. Her assigned position was at the eastern perimeter, where a small hill provided elevated views of 3 potential approach routes. She traced her finger along the map, calculating distances and angles of fire. The M4 was accurate and reliable, but its effective range and sustained fire capability were limited compared to the M249. If the intelligence reports were accurate about enemy numbers, she would need every advantage possible. Her roommate, Corporal Jessica Chen, entered and noticed the maps. "Heavy stuff tomorrow?" "Could be," Maria replied without looking up. "Intel suggests they're planning something big. You ready for it?" Maria looked at her weapon, then back at the maps. "I'll have to be, won't I?" Outside, the base buzzed with preparation activity. Soldiers checked equipment, filled sandbags, and reinforced positions. The atmosphere was tense but focused, as it always was before anticipated contact with enemy forces. Maria wondered if Thompson and the others would maintain their skeptical attitudes when bullets started flying. She had learned long ago that respect in the military was earned through actions, not words. Tomorrow would provide another opportunity to prove that determination and skill mattered more than physical stereotypes. As night fell over the Afghan desert, Maria made a mental note of every detail from the day's briefings, every weakness in their defensive plan, and every advantage she could potentially exploit from her position. She might not have the weapon she wanted, but she would make the most of what she had. The pre-dawn hours brought an eerie silence that every experienced soldier recognized as the calm before the storm. Maria had been awake since 0400 hours, double-checking her equipment and reviewing her sector of responsibility one final time. The eastern perimeter position she occupied offered excellent visibility across the rocky terrain, where intelligence suggested the main assault would come. At 05:30 hours, the first mortar rounds began falling inside the base perimeter. The explosive impacts sent shockwaves through the ground as soldiers scrambled to their defensive positions. Maria's training kicked in immediately as she took cover behind the reinforced sandbag wall that formed her fighting position. "Contact east, multiple targets approaching the wire," shouted Private Johnson from a nearby observation post. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see dozens of muzzle flashes winking in the darkness approximately 800 meters away. The Taliban fighters were advancing in coordinated waves, using the rocky terrain for cover as they bounded forward. The base's defensive perimeter erupted in gunfire as soldiers engaged the attacking force. Maria began picking off targets methodically with her M4, but the enemy numbers were far greater than anticipated. For every fighter she neutralized, 2 more seemed to take his place. "Rodriguez, we've got movement on your left flank." Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through her radio. Maria shifted her position and spotted another group of fighters, attempting to infiltrate through a dry creek bed that ran parallel to the base's eastern wall. She engaged the flanking force, but her M4's magazine ran dry quickly. As she reloaded, more enemy fighters advanced closer to the perimeter. The sustained rate of fire she could maintain with the M4 was insufficient for the number of targets presenting themselves. "Base, this is East Perimeter," Maria radioed. "I've got at least 40 fighters in my sector, possibly more. They're using multiple approach routes and coordinating their advance." "Copy, East Perimeter. Hold your position. Reinforcements are tied up with attacks on the north and south walls." Maria realized she was largely on her own for the immediate future. The M4 was accurate and she was making her shots count, but the weapon's limitations were becoming apparent. Between magazine changes, enemy fighters were able to advance significantly closer to the base perimeter. A RPG round exploded 50 meters to her left, showering her position with debris and temporarily deafening her. When her hearing returned, she could hear enemy voices much closer than before. They had used the explosion as cover to advance nearly to the outer wire barriers. "They're almost at the perimeter," she radioed urgently. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and her single-shot engagement method wasn't sufficient to stop the coordinated assault. Through her scope, Maria could see the enemy fighters were well-equipped and disciplined. They moved with military precision, suggesting these weren't just local militia but experienced fighters, possibly foreign volunteers or special Taliban units. Another wave of mortars began falling, this time landing closer to the base's critical infrastructure. The enemy was systematically targeting the communications center, motor pool, and ammunition storage areas. This wasn't a random attack but a carefully planned operation designed to cripple the base's defensive capabilities. "East Perimeter, what's your ammunition status?" Lieutenant Morrison's voice came through the radio during a brief lull in the fighting. "Down to 3 magazines," Maria responded while scanning for new targets, "and they keep coming." She knew that at her current rate of fire, those 3 magazines wouldn't last long. The enemy had clearly studied their defensive positions and knew exactly where to apply pressure. Her sector was apparently identified as a key vulnerability, which explained why so many fighters were concentrating their efforts on her position. As dawn began to break over the desert, Maria could see the full scope of the assault. Enemy fighters were positioned in a rough semicircle around the eastern approach, with several heavy weapons positions supporting their advance. The morning light revealed at least 60 fighters in her immediate area, with more moving up from reserve positions further back. "This is going to be a long day," she muttered to herself, chambering another round and preparing for the next wave of attacks. The doubt and mockery from the armory seemed like a distant memory now. All that mattered was stopping the enemy advance and protecting her fellow soldiers. The morning sun climbed higher as the intensity of the firefight escalated dramatically. Maria's ammunition was running dangerously low, and the enemy fighters had managed to establish positions within 200 meters of the base perimeter. Their tactics were becoming more sophisticated as they realized the defensive positions were undermanned. "East Perimeter, this is Base Command," the radio crackled. We're taking heavy casualties on the north wall. Can you hold your sector with minimal support? Maria looked out at the advancing enemy forces and made a quick calculation. Negative, Base Command. I need immediate resupply or additional firepower. They're about to breach the wire. The response was not what she hoped to hear. All supply. Runs are currently impossible due to heavy fire. You'll need to make do with what you have. As if to emphasize the dire nature of the situation, a squad of enemy fighters began cutting through the outer perimeter wire less than 100 meters from her position. Maria engaged them with precise shots, but for every fighter she stopped, others continued working on the barriers. She was down to her last magazine when she spotted Sergeant Thompson running across the compound in a low crouch, carrying a large canvas bag. Despite their earlier disagreement, he was risking his life to bring supplies to the forward positions. "Thompson," Maria called out as he dove into her fighting position. "What have you got?" The gruff weapons sergeant looked sheepish as he opened the bag. Inside was an M249 saw, complete with several hundred rounds of linked ammunition. "Thought you might need this after all," he said, avoiding eye contact. "What changed your mind?" Maria asked as she quickly inspected the weapon. "Been listening to the radio traffic. You've been holding this entire sector by yourself for 3 hours. That M4 isn't cutting it against these numbers." He helped her set up the bipod legs on the sandbag wall. "Besides, Lieutenant Morrison ordered me to get you whatever you requested originally." Maria felt the familiar weight of the M249 as she positioned it for optimal fields of fire. The weapon was indeed heavy, but she had trained extensively with it during her previous deployments. More importantly, its sustained automatic fire capability was exactly what the tactical situation demanded. "Thompson," she said as she loaded the first belt of ammunition, "you might want to find some cover. This is about to get very loud." The weapons sergeant grinned. "Mind if I stick around? I want to see how this plays out." Maria didn't have time to argue. The enemy fighters had breached the outer wire and were advancing toward the main defensive positions. She acquired her first target group and squeezed the trigger. The M249 roared to life, sending a devastating stream of automatic fire across the battlefield. The psychological effect was immediate and dramatic. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently suddenly found themselves under withering suppressive fire that forced them to seek whatever cover they could find. "Holy hell," Thompson muttered as he watched Maria methodically sweep the weapon's fire across the enemy positions. "You actually know how to use that thing." Maria continued firing in controlled bursts, conserving ammunition while maintaining constant pressure on the attacking force. The M249's effective range allowed her to engage targets that had been safely beyond her M4's capabilities. More importantly, the sustained automatic fire prevented the enemy from coordinating their advance. "Base Command, this is East Perimeter," she radioed during a brief pause to reload. "Enemy advance has been halted. They're taking cover and appear to be reassessing their approach." "Copy. East Perimeter. Outstanding work. Can you hold that position?" Maria looked at Thompson, who was already opening additional ammunition containers. "Affirmative, Base Command. Send me more ammo and I'll hold this line all day." The enemy fighters had clearly not expected to encounter heavy automatic weapons fire from the eastern perimeter. Their advance stalled completely as Maria continued to pour suppressive fire into their positions. Several fighters attempted to flank her position but were quickly driven back by accurate bursts from the M249. Thompson watched in amazement as Maria demonstrated complete mastery of the weapon system. Her fire control was precise, her target selection was tactical, and her ammunition management was efficient. Every assumption he had made about her capabilities was being proven wrong in the most dramatic way possible. "Rodriguez," he said during another lull, "I owe you an apology." "Save it for later, Sergeant," Maria replied, scanning for new targets. "Right now, help me spot for movement in that rocky area at 2 o'clock. The tide of battle was beginning to shift, but Maria knew this was only the beginning of what would likely be a very long day. The midday heat was becoming unbearable, but Maria maintained her focus as the enemy launched their second major assault. This time, they had learned from their earlier mistakes and were approaching from multiple directions simultaneously, trying to overwhelm her position through sheer numbers and coordination. "Contact front. Large group moving through the ravine system," Thompson called out, now serving as her spotter and ammunition handler. His earlier skepticism had been completely replaced by genuine respect and tactical cooperation. Maria swiveled, the M249 toward the new threat. Approximately 30 fighters were using a network of natural drainage channels to advance undercover. Their approach was more sophisticated this time, with covering fire being provided by snipers positioned in the distant hills. The first burst from her M249 sent the advancing fighters scrambling for cover, but they quickly resumed their advance, using bounds and overwatch tactics. These weren't untrained militia fighters. They were displaying military discipline and coordination that suggested professional training. "They're good," Thompson observed as he tracked multiple groups through his binoculars. "But they're about to learn why we call that thing a saw." Maria adjusted her position slightly to get a better angle on the ravine system. The M249's bipod provided stable support, allowing her to deliver precise automatic fire even in the prone position. She began systematically engaging each group as they attempted to advance, forcing them to seek cover and disrupting their coordinated movement. "Base command, this is East Perimeter," she radioed while maintaining fire. "Enemy is conducting a coordinated assault with approximately 60 fighters. They're using advanced small unit tactics and have sniper support. Roger, East Perimeter. Air support is inbound, ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like an eternity given the current intensity of the firefight. Maria knew she would have to hold her position without additional support until the aircraft arrived. The enemy fighters seemed to sense this as well, as they began pressing their attack more aggressively. A series of rifle grenades began exploding around her position, sending shrapnel and debris in all directions. One fragment tore through the sandbag wall inches from her head, but she continued firing without interruption. Her training had prepared her for this level of combat stress, and her focus remained absolutely clear. "Movement left flank," Thompson shouted over the noise of gunfire and explosions. A squad of enemy fighters had managed to work their way around to the northern edge of her sector and were attempting to establish an enfilading position. Maria quickly shifted the M249's fire to engage the flanking force. The weapon's traverse capabilities allowed her to rapidly engage threats across a wide arc without having to physically relocate. Her bursts of automatic fire forced the flanking squad to abandon their position and retreat to cover. The psychological effect of the sustained automatic fire was becoming apparent. Enemy fighters who had been advancing boldly during the morning assault were now much more cautious. The constant threat of the M249's devastating firepower was disrupting their ability to coordinate and execute their tactical plans. "Ammunition status?" Maria asked Thompson during a brief lull. "Still good. We've got 800 rounds remaining, plus what I can scrounge from other positions if needed," he replied while scanning the battlefield for new threats. The enemy. Fighters were regrouping for what appeared to be a final push before the air support arrived. Maria could see them massing in several locations, preparing for a coordinated assault from multiple directions simultaneously. Their plan was obvious: overwhelm her position through sheer volume of fire and numbers. "Here they come," Thompson warned as enemy fighters began emerging from cover across the entire eastern perimeter. Maria took a deep breath and prepared for the most intense phase of the battle. The M249 had already proven its worth, but the ultimate test was about to begin. She would need to demonstrate not just technical proficiency with the weapon, but tactical brilliance in how she employed its capabilities. "Thompson, when this starts, I need you to call out priority targets. Focus on the group leaders and anyone with heavy weapons." "Roger that," the weapons sergeant replied, his earlier doubts completely forgotten as he prepared to support Maria's defensive efforts. The enemy assault began with a coordinated mortar barrage designed to suppress her position, while infantry advanced from 3 different directions. Maria waited for the mortars to lift, then began engaging the closest threat group with disciplined bursts of automatic fire. The battle for the eastern perimeter was about to reach its climax, and everything would depend on Maria's ability to maximize the M249's devastating potential. The final enemy assault came with overwhelming force and coordination that tested every aspect of Maria's training and tactical judgment. Nearly 70 fighters attacked simultaneously from 4 different directions, supported by mortar fire and coordinated rifle grenades. The noise was deafening as bullets cracked overhead and explosions shook the ground around her fighting position. Maria's response was methodical and devastating. She had studied the enemy's approach routes during the earlier attacks and positioned the M249 to maximize its effectiveness against multiple threat axes. Her first burst caught a squad of fighters advancing through the central ravine, stopping their movement completely and forcing them to seek cover. "RPG team, 2 o'clock, Thompson shouted over the gunfire, pointing toward a two-man team setting up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Without hesitation, Maria swiveled the M249 and engaged the RPG team with a sustained burst. The heavy automatic fire forced them to abandon their weapon and retreat, eliminating a significant threat to not just her position, but the entire eastern perimeter. The enemy fighters were demonstrating remarkable courage and determination, continuing to advance despite taking heavy casualties from the M249's devastating fire. Some had managed to reach positions within 50 meters of the base perimeter, where they were attempting to establish firing positions to support the continuing assault. Maria's ammunition management became critical as the intensity of the firefight reached its peak. She fired in controlled bursts, ensuring each one had maximum tactical effect while conserving rounds for the threats that posed the greatest danger. Her years of training with the weapon system allowed her to maintain accurate fire even under the extreme stress of combat. "They're breaking through on the left," Thompson warned as a group of fighters managed to breach the outer wire barriers and were advancing toward the main defensive positions. Maria shifted fire immediately, raking the breakthrough area with sustained automatic fire. The psychological effect was immediate. As the advancing fighters realized they were completely exposed to the M249's field of fire, those who survived the initial burst retreated quickly, abandoning their breach attempt. The tide of battle began to turn decisively in Maria's favor as her tactical employment of the M249 disrupted every enemy assault attempt. The weapon's sustained fire capability allowed her to maintain constant pressure across multiple approach routes simultaneously, preventing the enemy from coordinating their attacks effectively. "Air support inbound," came the welcome radio call from base command. "Mark your position with smoke and take cover." Maria quickly threw a smoke grenade to mark her friendly position while continuing to engage targets with short, precise bursts. The sound of approaching aircraft was like music to her ears, but she knew the enemy would likely make one final desperate push before the air support arrived on station. She was right. The remaining enemy fighters launched a coordinated assault from their closest positions, attempting to overrun her before the aircraft could intervene. This was the moment that would determine the outcome of the entire engagement. Maria's response was flawless. She engaged the closest threats first, systematically working her way through the attacking force with controlled automatic fire. The M249's reliability never wavered despite the sustained firing, and her tactical positioning allowed her to engage targets across the entire threat spectrum. Thompson watched in amazement as Maria single-handedly broke the back of the enemy assault. Her fire control was so precise and effective that the attacking force simply could not maintain their advance. Fighters who moments before had been pressing forward aggressively were now seeking any available cover or retreating entirely. The arrival of close air support aircraft marked the end of the enemy's coordinated assault capability. Attack helicopters began engaging the retreating fighters with rockets and automatic cannons, but the decisive action had already been taken by Maria and her M249. "Cease fire, cease fire," came the radio call as the immediate threat was eliminated. "All positions report status." Maria lifted her finger from the trigger and conducted a quick assessment of her position. The M249 had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, never jamming or malfunctioning despite the sustained firing. More importantly, the eastern perimeter had held against overwhelming odds. "East perimeter secure," she radioed back. "No friendly casualties, enemy force neutralized or withdrawn." Thompson looked at the battlefield, then at Maria, then back at the battlefield. The evidence of her tactical mastery was scattered across the entire eastern approach. "Rodriguez," he said quietly. "I don't think I've ever seen anything like that." Maria began the process of clearing and safing her weapon, but her eyes continued scanning the terrain for any signs of remaining threats. The battle might be over, but a good soldier never assumed complete safety until the situation was thoroughly assessed. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of Maria's achievement. As the base's personnel conducted battlefield assessments and casualty reports, the numbers told an extraordinary story. The eastern perimeter, defended primarily by one soldier with an M249 saw, had repelled the largest and most coordinated assault of the entire engagement. Lieutenant Morrison arrived at Maria's position within an hour of the fighting's conclusion. His face showed a mixture of relief and amazement as he surveyed the battlefield. "Rodriguez, I need a full debrief on what happened here." Maria provided a detailed tactical report while Thompson nodded along, occasionally adding his observations. As a witness to the engagement, the lieutenant took careful notes, clearly understanding that this action would require significant documentation for higher command levels. Preliminary estimates suggest you engaged and neutralized approximately 40 enemy fighters while preventing the breach of our most vulnerable defensive sector, Morrison told her. Your actions likely saved dozens of American lives and prevented the enemy from achieving their primary tactical objectives. Word of Maria's extraordinary defensive action spread rapidly throughout the base. Soldiers who had been engaged in their own desperate battles on other perimeters began arriving to see the eastern approach for themselves. The evidence of sustained automatic weapons fire was unmistakable, with expended brass casings scattered around her fighting position and clear fields of fire extending across multiple approach routes. Sergeant Thompson took it upon himself to ensure everyone understood exactly what had transpired. She held this entire sector by herself for over 4 hours, he told anyone who would listen. When I brought her the saw, she used it like she was born to it. Never seen anything like her fire control and tactical judgment. The irony of Thompson's enthusiastic endorsement was not lost on Maria. The same man who had questioned her ability to handle the M249 was now telling everyone about her masterful employment of the weapon system. His change of attitude represented something larger happening throughout the unit. Captain Williams, the base commander, personally visited Maria's position that evening. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I've been in the Army for 20 years and I've never seen a single soldier have such a decisive impact on a major engagement. Your actions today exemplify everything we hope to achieve in our soldiers." The formal recognition would come later through official channels, but the immediate impact on unit morale and attitudes was more significant to Maria. Soldiers who had previously viewed her with skepticism or indifference now approached her, with genuine respect and professional curiosity about her tactical methods. The enemy's failure to breach the eastern perimeter had catastrophic effects on their overall battle plan. Intelligence officers later determined that capturing that sector was crucial to their strategy for overrunning the entire base. Maria's successful defense had disrupted their timeline and forced them to commit reserve forces prematurely, contributing to the failure of their entire operation. During the formal after-action review conducted several days later, Maria's defensive action was analyzed in detail and incorporated into training materials for other units. Her tactical employment of the M249, particularly her ammunition management and target prioritization, became case study examples of individual initiative and weapons proficiency. Thompson requested a private meeting with Maria before the unit rotated back to their main base. "Rodriguez, I owe you more than just an apology. I let my assumptions cloud my professional judgment, and that could have had serious consequences for this entire unit." "We all learned something, Sergeant Thompson," Maria replied diplomatically. "Maybe so, but you already knew what you were capable of. I had to see it to believe it, and that's my failure, not yours." The transformation in unit attitudes extended beyond just weapons assignments. Maria found herself included in tactical planning, discussions, and sought out for advice on defensive strategies. Her proven combat effectiveness had earned her a level of professional respect that transcended any remaining prejudices about women in combat roles. 6 months later, Maria received the Bronze Star Medal for her actions during the defense of Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The citation specifically mentioned her tactical proficiency with crew-served weapons and her decisive impact on a major enemy assault. More importantly to Maria, she also received a promotion recommendation from Lieutenant Morrison, who had observed firsthand her leadership capabilities under extreme pressure. The story of her request for the M249 and the subsequent battle became part of unit folklore. But Maria preferred to focus on the lessons learned rather than personal recognition. She had proven that determination, training, and tactical judgment were more important than physical stereotypes or preconceived notions about combat capabilities. Years later, when asked about that day, Maria would always emphasize the importance of proper preparation and the value of trusting soldiers to know their own capabilities. The mockery she faced in the armory had been transformed into a teaching moment about the dangers of assumptions in military operations, where such attitudes could have life or death consequences for entire units.